Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of Fake Accents Unite. This week I am joined, as always, by the ever-delirious Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Apparently, I'm delirious.
Well,
Good evening.
I mean, delirious, delusional, it's two sides of the same coin.
Very much so, yes.
But speaking of the other side of the coin and the delusional aspect, we also have Tailed Feature here. Good evening.
It's good, man.
Take no heed. I'm merely salty, of course, because I know that of all the people on this earth, Tailed Feature is the only one who knows the true identity of the Britisher, as opposed to me, who's worked with him for over a year now. I'm not frustrated by this at all, of course.
Well, I mean, Tailed Feature is the Fantomas lookalike. So he is the kind of person whom a non-entity such as myself would most be likely to trust. I can imagine in my mind's eye. I can basically imagine people frantically googling Fantomas.
I'm sure
It was a film. It was a French film series.
Oh God! Of course, you'd be mentioning the French. Oh, I have a story actually, which we should lead into for this evening. Before we get onto the hardcore stuff, I know a lot of people are keen for us to get onto the main story of the week, which would be manifestos, my dear gentlemen. But let me just update something. I forgot to update the title. So, what I want to get into is what you've been up to this week, Britisher, because aside from producing the week that was, you've been remarkably quiet on social media from what I've seen. And yes, and
Quiet?
here I'm putting up on the screen for everybody to see, and I will link to you in the chat that is on Discord, a story which describes the Dresden Green Vault robbery, which happened 3 hours ago.
I see. Yes.
We know
I couldn't possibly comment.
a historic set consisting of 37 parts each fears that the thieves may try to break them up. Of those, they clearly don't know the Britisher, who would not dare break up such priceless artifacts.
Just so happens to be fluent in German. Yes. Yes.
I tell you, ladies and
this has
gentlemen,
got absolutely nothing to do with me, of course.
3 out of 10 diamond sets have gone missing. I tell you,
It isn't as if I have several stolen Rembrandts and Leonardo da Vinci's on my wall.
ladies and gentlemen,
An hourglass vitrine with some delightful Saxon artwork. Yes.
ladies and gentlemen, I regret to announce that the Britisher is sporting a wonderful diamond-studded doublet for his goes around his jar on the shelf this evening, filled with stolen diamonds. Of course, I thought you were looking sparklier than usual today, Britisher. You know, if we ever end up turning this thing into a television series, you realise that you will just be a voice. You will still phone it in, as it were, but there will be,
Of course.
but there will
because cat burglars couldn't possibly be showing their face.
no, but there would be a brain in a jar which would light up whenever you said something that would sit on a space.
The entire reason why I allow you to tell them the story of my being a brain in a jar is merely in order to deflect from my true purposes, which is obviously to raid the museums of Central Europe.
I do remember reading a story. It may, like I say, I was reading a story. It may have been a like one of these, like a fictional account, shall we say, of a cat burglar, who was very dismayed by the fact that things had become very much more smash and grabby of late because security systems had become so advanced, whereas cat burglars had a bit of class. You know, the joy of the cat burglar was in getting in and out, and no one ever knew you had been there until, of course, they went to collect their goods, as it were. You know, you may even leave a calling card if you were so inclined, but no.
Well, I mean, I will have to sort of admit, I mean, given that you're obviously deeply steeped in your psychology,
Oh,
the
yes.
the only true reason why I am stalking the various museums of Europe has, of course, nothing to do with my seeking to enrich myself. It is far more my seeking to find the Grace Kelly in my life.
You're a kleptomaniac.
Of course, you wouldn't understand that illusion because you've never watched any film that has been made prior to the year 2001.
I've heard a song. I've heard a song by Mika, I believe it's called Grace Kelly. That's as far as I go really when it comes to that aspersion.
Whatever happened to Mika? He just seemed to disappear.
Yes, I'm quite sure some people in the chat will at least know that I'm referring to a Hitchcock film, but yes.
A Hitchcock. This is a family-friendly show, British. I can't have you saying such horrendous words as the Hitchcock on
Have you ticked that box on the new YouTube thing then? That's suitable
oh, that's suitable for children. No, God, no. This is the worst thing about the YouTube. Like, I'm sure everyone who's clued into the YouTube thing knows, but those who don't know, if now we get a box at the beginning of every video and every stream, which basically says, is this content aimed at children? And if you tick yes, you lose all the money you would have made from that video. And if you say no, then they basically put their eye in the sky on you anyway. And if they judge that what you have made is actually for children, even if it's not intended so by yourself, it gets marked as made for kids and you get ruined. And this includes things like having colourful thumbnails, or so I'm told.
Yes, I mean, the good thing about me being demonetized entirely then is that I don't get a choice. Mine are all made for adults immediately. I don't have a choice.
God damn.
Well, in their defence, this was basically foisted upon them. So for once, I'm actually speaking up in favour of YouTube. This wasn't one of their sinister ploys.
No, it's copper.
This for once was actually a US thing that has been forced on them.
It's litigation, basically, by another name.
So, what does it actually mean in practical terms for channels that were designed for kids?
It doesn't mean very much, because channels that were designed for kids were already being hit hard, because obviously there was a backlash against paedophiles in the comments, effectively, which led to a huge number of family-friendly, like family vlogger-style channels getting completely demonetized and their comment sections locked. Yeah. The worst one, I think, that I saw was there was a channel which used to do interviews with kids in hospices, and they basically kept up this archive of videos with comments from kids who had done their interview and they had died. And the reason they kept the videos up was all the messages of support and so on from the wider community, which they kept up for the families, So if the families wanted to know that at the end of the day, like, they had made a difference to either other parents who had kids who were struggling with the same thing, or just general support from the community in general, they could do that. And YouTube locked and wiped all the comment sections for their entire channel. And they had to release a video. They're in tears. This is like their whole livelihood. It's a charity thing, and it was horrible. It was truly horrible to see.
Well, yes, but what I'm sort of more getting at is, if you imagine something like, the Magic Roundabout or something like that, these days, I could well imagine that rather than being made for television, something like that these days would most likely be made by some dedicated producer for YouTube.
Yes, it would be a web series. The big thing that YouTube has always had, and the reason this particular piece of legislation is coming into effect, is because YouTube has a 13 plus requirement to make an account on its server. However, nobody abides by that rule. There's the most profitable channel on YouTube is, Ryan's Toy Review or something like that, made something stupid like £50 million last year, and that's an 8-year-old reviewing toys, which is definitely
which is definitely for adults.
It's definitely aimed at kids, right? So the idea is that they either need to go hardcore, and they say, basically, if we catch you making something which is for kids, then you're just going to be it's going to remove your video from the platform. But that's ridiculous as well, because you take something like Adventure Time, which is obviously a cartoon which kids enjoy, but has a massive adult following, much like SpongeBob, I would say. Anything with gaming, anything with any kind of real mass market appeal, because obviously not the family-friendly stuff, but most of the people who are consuming this content are aged between whatever it is, 8 and 20. So that's the problem that they're seeing.
What? It's not an American law, though.
It's not.
It's not.
I've only seen one.
Not. I thought it was.
It is, but because YouTube is based in the US,
Yeah.
it applies to everything that goes onto their platform.
No, I was just wondering whether, because from what I understand, obviously that now with people ticking these different boxes, so basically if somebody is producing content for children, once they check that box, I mean, obviously they then, agree to no end of, suability, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But does that basically just mean that they just don't get any advertising, or
Yeah.
does this mean that effectively child-friendly channels have effectively been rendered no longer commercially viable on YouTube?
Pretty much. The whole issue stems around the idea of data collection, because it is illegal to collect data on children in the US, including things like their viewing habits, etc. And what do you know? YouTube's algorithm and all of Google's algorithms work on collecting data on whoever's using their service, and basically serving you ads and recommended and whatever.
Well, yes, but I mean, just as an example, I mean, if you effectively say that your channel is made for children,
Mm-hmm.
YouTube would then not try and specifically target each child due to its viewing habits, but would instead decide, okay, this is something for children, so we will advertise Smarties on it.
That would require them to they'd have to create an entirely different system. Whether or not they end up doing that as a workaround is a different matter. But as it is, it's all tied into current Google infrastructure, where it's not just recommending you ads based on your, the video type that you're watching and the demographics involved there. It's offering you stuff because you went on Amazon last week and you looked at Hoovers, and it's going to send you an ad. It's going to serve you an ad of a Hoover, right?
I understand.
So
that
unless they're going to split their system, so that if you've marked your channel as kids only, they have this specific subset of ads which get played, and it doesn't collect data anymore, but it's that. But advertisers want to collect the data. Part of the reason they use Google's service is AdSense provides all these statistics on who's watching their ads and how long they're watching them and who's clicking.
I understand that, but if that has now effectively been rendered completely impossible due to American laws, then one will still want to advertise to children. So one will have to find a, how shall we say, more 20th century version of advertising to children, which will basically mean, like on a television program, during the time in which children's programs run, that's when you advertise Mattel toys.
Oh, yes, I have no doubt that they...
You would surely think they will eventually end up showing advertisements targeted at children as a generic, as opposed to each individual child, if you know what I mean.
The number of child-based ads will not change. The profitability of those ads and the value of that advertising space will decrease dramatically.
Yeah.
And that's what the issue is, and that's why the commercial viability, you think about the fact that if your video is marked as not suitable for all advertisers and you lose between 90 and 95% of your revenue, which does happen, ladies and gentlemen, then that's what they're looking at, basically. But anyway, this was a tangent, wasn't it? Let's.
Then again, if you're basically one of these kids channels that gets 2 million views and you lose 90%, it's still the equivalent of having put out a clip that's just got 200,000 views as far as advertising is concerned.
It's true, but
No, I just found it startling because obviously, some of those kids channels look extremely successful, and to be sawing them off at the knees does seem to be a rather stark blow when it's done anything wrong.
Let's just say it's not a great decision. But yes,
you've got to look at the positives though. Things like queer kid stuff now no longer have.
You mean you? But then where will your revenue? Oh wait a second.
Yeah, but somehow I've got the feeling queer kids stuff will just simply rebrand itself as from now on being instructional for the actual educators as opposed to the children.
Yeah, or something nonsense like that. Right. Colin P. Smith, will it mean every video is riddled with ads every 30 seconds? Yes, all of them for Mattel toys, and if you're an adult, for Mattel assault rifles. Because if you didn't know, Mattel manufactures the M16.
Really? I had no idea about that.
They do indeed.
I just thought they were entirely a children's. That comes as a total surprise.
No. So they used to be a joke in the forces, which was like they make toys for kids and toys to kill kids, and that was the joke. Not that the military has a dark sense of humour or anything like that, you know. A few super chats come in as we move along. So Mighty Balzac for $5 says 20-year-old Britisher stood alone at the Pons Supplicus against the Horde, whilst Horatius ducked off for a pee and saved the young Republic.
I couldn't possibly comment. I wouldn't wish to sully the name of Horatius to that extent. Albeit, you know, he was known for having a weak bladder, is all I can say.
Mr. Gently Benevolent says, for $5 again, the Australians are in tonight. It's good to see you. Says, was your spare room also where the fallen Madonna with the big boobies ended up after the war, Mr. Britisher?
Yes, of course, and the world famous cuckoo clock. And I also had the Knockwurst mounted, because I felt that it now was of historic significance.
I think you'll find, Mr. Gently Benevolent, that the Britisher motorboats that fallen Madonna every evening before he goes to bed. So there you go.
I am so glad, and please don't spoil it, I am so glad that I do not know what motorboating means in this particular content. So let's just draw a veil over this and move on.
You poor man.
Stay pure.
Bless his heart. Stay pure. The Invidious has donated £5. Thank you ever so much. It says, I've DM'd you 2 things via Twitter with regards to my decision to not vote in the upcoming UK general election. I shall keep that on side for when we get to election style stuff, Mr. Invidious, but thank you very much for sharing that and sending in £5. Now, the first story I want to talk about after, our slight tangent there, is about a film... Tangent about children's toys and YouTube revenue and everything that our audience is clearly fascinated by. But are you aware of a film that has come out recently called Blue Story?
I'm aware of the furore around the film.
So this is a film. Basically, it was based on a web series, I believe. It is a hard-hitting crime drama about 2 friends who become rivals in a vicious London gangland war. And it had a very small budget, film-wise. It had £1.5 million. And basically, it's supposed to be the tale of kind of like reverse Romeo and Juliet with a slight homoerotic twist. So Timmy and Marco, who are friends, who live in opposing postcodes, and end up in a gangland war together. Been quite divisive, bit controversial in terms of the actual rating. People seem to either love it or hate it. It's either sort of, brilliant, surprisingly solid, an amazing film, much more than I expected, or it's B-movie, reminds me why I don't go to London anymore, Brokeback Mountain for black people, don't waste your time, thoroughly disappointing, right? So there's that. But the reason that it comes to mind is because, unfortunately, there has been a machete brawl in Birmingham.
Yes. Also, there have been. I think it's View Cinemas has completely withdrawn from it. One or 2 other cinema chains have also withdrawn from it, but are returning to it after beefing up their security. But I believe View Cinemas, that particular cinema chain, has just completely said, "Okay, fine, we're not having anything to do with this anymore."
Yep.
Because it's not just that there has been... That was the one that gained most prominence. But apparently there was, somewhere between half a dozen to a dozen other smaller incidents at other cinemas. And basically various cinemas kind of just pulled away from this and said, look, no thank you.
No, this film has completely come under the radar for me. I had not heard of it before today. There was no hype building, as it were.
Yeah,
but
I very much doubt this was a film that got a complete national release, if you know what I mean.
I don't know. It appears to be in a decent number of cinemas, or it was in a decent number of cinemas until today. My local Odeon is showing it and all sorts and stuff like that. But the big story is that 5 teenagers, including a 13-year-old girl, were arrested after a mass brawl involving machetes broke out at a cinema. 7 West Midlands police officers were hurt while attempting to disperse the fighting at the Star City complex in Birmingham on Saturday evening. The force said for those responding to the disorder, it may have been the worst thing they'd ever seen. The police had to draw tasers, which is a rarity because they have to get approval for those even in the cities, and used a dispersal order to clear 100 youths around. And a lot of people screaming, from what I'm told. I was shocked, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I've seen a picture, which was on Twitter, I think, of a group of kids standing around outside, and I think it was taken from footage, and there's just a child there who looks like he's no more than about 10 or 11 years old, holding this machete that's as long as his leg. And you think that we've kind of moved past gangland violence to a much greater degree. I mean, I know knife crime is pretty bad in London, for instance. However, I mean, comparatively, historically, excluding the minor downturn that was taken. I mean, it was decreasing over time. It's had a sharp spike up recently, but I mean, still compared to historical levels, it's quite low at the moment. And I didn't think really we had that much of an issue with people basically weaponizing kids and sending them out to hack up people from a different postcode. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think, there has also been that big question, hasn't there? Is this film causing violence?
Oh, yeah, well, that's what View will have taken the view of.
Well, no, I don't think View really necessarily took that position, but I think sort of in public that immediately seemed to be, the question being raised. And I don't think it has anything to do with this film causing violence. I think it is the fact that this film is being sold as some sort of insight into gang culture.
Right.
And it seems to be kind of targeted at that sort of an audience. And therefore, if you bring in, a bunch of people trying to be gangsters in hoodies, and a bunch of people who actually are gangsters in hoodies, what do you actually expect?
Several of
all the actual people who seem to be attracted to this, rather than it creating violence, if you know what I mean.
Several of the people who have reviewed this, interestingly, lowered their rating because people in the screening were shouting expletives at the screen every time a character performed a decent or good act, apparently. And the one character who appeared to have a turnaround moment in the film was called something along the range of like an effing nonce or something, by people in the screen. So it seems to be a divisive and strange film. But I'm still shocked by the idea that even wannabe gangsters would go to a cinema complex out with, openly carrying machetes and attempt to hack up other kids who are under 15.
My guess is it's actually the real gangsters that arrive with machetes. And when it comes to the youngster whom you saw with the machete, we know that in a lot of gangs, what they do is they have the youngsters, the underage kids, carry the weapons.
Oh, right.
So that if they're stopped, it's not those who would go to prison for a very, very long time who have the weapons.
I see what you're saying. It'd be interesting to know about that. The police force, who obviously responded, are adding that we know that Birmingham isn't unusual in this. Let's not pretend that knife crime or violence in under 25s is rare or isolated around Birmingham. I don't know. I grew up in an area which is, I don't know. I mean, we did have some stabbings, right? When the two council estate families who were feuding decided to get uppity with one another. We had 1 or 2 stabbings. But this was once every once every 5 to 10 years, and which is, you think for a town which I grew up in, which is about 60,000 people, that's not bad, really. Shocking, truly shocking, the whole thing. There are no short-term fixes to this. We're prepared and we're in this for the long run. We're going to work with schools and other partners to prevent youth violence becoming an increasing problem. I mean, it appears to already be a problem. So, but I'm not sure.
Well, I think it is one of these things that these sorts of things can mushroom very quickly, but they are very, very hard to put down, to kind of change the culture, to turn it around. So,
I mean, you can't point a gun or a taser at them and say, be a better family, can you? It doesn't really work that way.
Well, I mean, put it like this. It is very easy to have knife crime rise by telling everybody that they won't any longer be stopped and searched if they're carrying any knives.
Yeah, that's a bad idea.
Like that, you can very quickly turn that, you can kind of have that statistic move very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
The moment then, thereafter, all of them are carrying knives, you're saying, oh, we're going to start, stop and search again now.
Yeah.
That's really the least of their priorities thereafter, because it's not so much that they're now worried, oh, I might now be stopped again by the police if I'm carrying this knife. No, they're much more worried about being confronted by a member of the opposite gang who will still be carrying a knife.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the things that the geniuses in charge of this in London, and I believe the culture has just simply spread from London, the geniuses in charge of this in London managed to do was to send knife crime going up like crazy. And that falls squarely in the lap of Sadiq Khan and the person people always like to forget in this, Theresa May.
Yes.
She was Home Secretary, and she worked hand in hand with Sadiq Khan in, putting new rules and legislation in place. So yes, this falls squarely with her. It's remarkable what those two idiots have managed to concoct here.
Well, as the chat is pointing out, we do have obviously the perfect solution, which is simply hashtag knife-free chicken boxes, no stab popcorn.
Yes, that will do it.
Yeah,
that
all that
do it.
jazz.
In all fairness, I think there are also other elements to this. Not so much in Birmingham. As I say, I think this has entirely travelled outward from London. But in London itself, I think it perhaps is also not the best idea to bring in brutalised populations from African war zones. Because I believe the two main instigators regarding the knife violence are believed to be two Somali gangs in the north of London.
Yes.
So, again, Somalia not necessarily the most peaceful place on earth.
Are you telling me it's not known for its rich wine valleys and
yes, precisely,
and delicate cuisine? Yes.
So this is one of the most lawless places on earth, where it is pretty much might is right. It's the rule of the fist, and you're bringing in populations from that part of the world, and they, want it or not, they bring part of that culture with them, and that's perhaps not a very clever idea in a heavily urbanized area. Yes, so I think it's not just that we have to, watch what we do regarding stop and search and things like that, that one shouldn't play fast and loose just for the sake of, dare I say it, populism. Theresa May, apparently the so totally sensible person, who looks to others and accuses them of populism. No, I'm sorry, that was populism, Mrs. May. That sort of stuff was very unwise, but I think, yes, one has to also see it as possibly combining with, you bringing in rather troubled individuals from very troubled parts of the world. And, well, yes, you then get a result.
Yes, I tend to agree. I have a few more super chats that have come in. So Marcus10 has donated £5. Thank you ever so much. Says, what do the Chinese state and the Liberal Democrats have in common? They both will ignore a democratic vote.
I have no idea what that person is talking about.
No, obviously not.
I think that person should send another super chat elaborating more.
Speaking of super chats that need to be elaborated on, however, we have Captain Smith who says, Britisher, 12-hour stream on the Romans when?
12? You think that this could be covered in 12 hours?
No, but it might be a good start, mightn't it?
Well, I believe, first off, streams only run for 8 hours. I know that for a fact because I have been on streams that ran 8 hours, and then eventually the system cuts off and you need to start a new stream. I kid you not.
Shocking.
You know, the thing is, I'm quite sure that I could go on ad infinitum about the Romans. How much of that the audience might be able to take is another matter.
It's also about where do you start, where do you end? Because usually your Romans anecdotes are usually a ramble,
This would just be complete scattergun.
glanced.
You know, you'd basically throw a dart into a dartboard and go, okay, so the beginnings of the Republic, and it would just go from there.
I feel quite similarly when I have a couple of people who say, "Oh, Mark, just dox myself there. Oh, not so obvious. Could you do more on psychology in your time in the military?" And I'm going, "Oh my goodness, like there's so much to unpack there. I don't know where I'd even start, but we'll see. And finally, we also have here Architect of Fate, who's donated another $5 in order to tell us that a 20-year-old Britisher looked upon the face of God before the first day and said, "Entertain me." Could you say, "Entertain me," Britisher?
Entertain me. Well, I have just actually watched a favourite film of mine, which of course you have never heard about. This was actually due to my having that particular film on Blu-ray. I've only got a handful of films on Blu-ray, very few of which I can actually remember that I've got them on Blu-ray, because I've got them all in those kind of slimline little packets in order to save space.
Two-headed mega shark?
Yeah, precisely. So the one I do always remember that I've got on Blu-ray is The Agony and the Ecstasy. Now, before anybody thinks that this is some BDSM extravaganza...
The Marquis de Sade making his debut, yeah.
It's a film with Charlton Heston and Rex Harrison about Michelangelo doing the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So you can imagine the sort of the shots, they're sort of luscious and the graphics are beautiful and whatever. And with my old television having conked out and my having to go through the dreadful expense of getting another one, I then wanted to see whether it would, how good a picture quality it has. So I put the most challenging film I knew to have into the DVD, and voila, it all looked gorgeous. So it was a perfect test. And I have no idea why I started talking about this particular subject, so we'll just bring that particular anecdote to a halt. There was some jumping off point which brought me onto this, and now I was actually supposed to make my point, and I have no idea what it was.
To anything to do with streaming about the Romans for 8 hours?
No, it was something not so obvious said thereafter, and I have no idea what it is.
Well, I shall take us on.
This is one of the things old age will do to you folks.
Well, old age? I mean, you're only 25.
Well, that is that.
Well, Drake Glazer has donated $5. Thank you very much. It says, as a member of the Caliphate of MN, I may happily say that the Britishers' racist views on the Somali people is extremely out of line. End sarcasm. So it's that.
By the way, I have remembered now what it was. It was the comment before the super chat that I gazed upon God and told him to entertain me.
Oh, indeed.
And obviously, having seen that film, you had shots of Michelangelo painting God, effectively, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So he was creating God in his image as opposed to the other way around. So yes, I mean, who knows? Perhaps that was another 20-year-old Britisher.
Possibly. Architect of Fate has donated $5 and again says, giving everyone a gun would end the knife problem. The bullets would also lessen the burden on the NHS after the initial rush.
Hang on. He only said giving everybody a gun. He never mentioned ammunition.
Never mentioned it. Yes, and British firearm laws requiring ammunition to be stored in a different location to where you store the actual
all
firearm.
that you would end up with is people walking around with lumps of metal in their pocket.
Just beating each other to
that
death
any
with the
different?
wet end, you know. The wet end. Right. Yeah, just give everybody a gun, and the people with the longest gun have the extra reach, so they win. That's the general gist of that one, when they're beating each other to death with them. So before we go on too far, I have one more story before we hit proper sort of politics, as it were. And that's that. Do you remember there was the truck, the lorry, that was found to have 39 dead Chinese migrants in it?
Yes.
A few.
Well, I believe they were Vietnamese in the end. First one reported them as Chinese. Yes.
Righto. So the lorry driver who is caught with this, who people had this huge campaign actually saying he was innocent because he basically said that he picked up the lorry and didn't know that they were there, and that it was just his job to pick it up from Dover or wherever it was. It turns out that actually he's admitted that he knew full well that the people were in the lorry and that he was aiding and abetting illegal immigration with full knowledge of it. He's just pleaded guilty to conspiring with others to assist illegal immigration between the 1st of May 2018 and October 2019. And there appears to be a larger plot afoot just to work people into the UK, which anyone with any lick of sense knows, but it's an interesting note that it's sort of a watch this space, don't you think? You've been remarkably quiet, Tails. Do you have anything to comment or anything to collect?
As of yet, not really, no.
I see. It's truly a blessing to have you on this show, Tailed.
I do wonder why you invite me sometimes.
All right. Well, let's get on. And I haven't forgotten you, Mr. Invidious. It says, I've decided not to vote in the upcoming UK general election. I've sent you a message with my reasoning, so we'll go through that in a second. But are both of you going to vote in the general election?
Yes.
So it's one yes.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, yes, I will turn up at at the polling station. But yes, I have a serious problem. That is that I just find the particular candidate I am given as a choice is a bit of a problem for me. So I may well end up spoiling my ballot paper.
I may well as well. For those, I get to vote in my sort of, you get the interim constituency if you're a student, right? So, unfortunately, as I can't go home in time, I have exams and whatnot. It is that I have Tower Hamlets as my constituency, and it's an interesting set of candidates. So I'm thinking about spoiling my ballot paper also, but nothing.
I mean, for me, anything other than a vote for the SNP is akin to spoiling your ballot anyway. So
I'm surprised that you're not going to turn up there shouting "freedom" atop a horse covered in face paint and with a great broadsword. Except, obviously, you're going to vote for the SNP anyway because you're in favour of a second independence referendum and, of course, a communist state of Scotland.
I don't have a broadsword license.
You don't have. You don't get a broadsword license. You take it in Scotland.
Well, I mean, in that regard, given that sort of phonetically you could you could pull that off, couldn't you? Sort of, you arrive and rather than sort of freedom while standing there naked, covered in woad, you just roar sturgeon, and then just turn and walk away quietly.
Can you give us a roar of sturgeon, Tail?
Oh.
No. No, it was that.
On that clipped.
Oh, shame. Real shame. Britisher, which Roman emperor would you put on the ballot if you were to spoil it and then tick next to that name?
So a Roman.
Which is your favourite, basically?
Well, if one asks me my favourite Roman emperor, I would have to say Vespasian.
Is it just because he's got a funny name?
Well, they've all got funny names. Haven't they? But no, that one is the one that really seemed to have a sort of a sarcastic sense of humour, and he seemed to be a shrewd chap. I think when you look at the statue, when you look at the bust of Vespasian, you can kind of see that he is a kind of common sense guy who kind of made good, if you know what I mean.
You and your obsession.
He was never intended as an emperor. He got there by accident, if you know what I mean. No, go ahead.
You and your obsession with busts. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh well, yes, of course.
You just cannot help. You cannot help yourself motorboating them. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. But here's another one. Vespasian. I mean, he started really as a general, if you know what I mean, who eventually ends up on the throne. He was also had a hand in conquering Britain, by the way. But he fell asleep during one of the, interminable recitals of Nero. So you can sort of imagine, can't you, that here is Nero up on the stage with his lyre going on. In the audience is made up of senators all terribly trying to look interested into something that is just ghastly. And then eventually, somewhere amid it all, this snoring sound emerges. And when everybody turns, there is Vespasian, just basically...
completely knocked for the count, conked.
And he literally needed to flee for his life. So he wasn't done away with there at the meeting. One kind of let him get away, go home. But obviously the idea was, okay, let's send some heavies round and get rid of this man who would dare to insult the great genius of Nero. So he fled for his life, and then while he was in hiding, the great Jewish revolt happened in Judea. And one kind of informed Nero, well, it's not that easy conquering that part of the world, because all the cities are very heavily fortified. We need somebody who's good at cracking heavy fortifications. Well, fine, send the best general for the job. The best general for the job happens to be the one who was very good at cracking fortifications in England, in Britain, when we were conquering it. He's presently in hiding from you because he fell asleep during a recital of yours. So he was very quickly pardoned and sent off to Judea.
Amazing.
So yes, it's a Vespasian is a wonderful sort of. It's a beautiful story, and he's a wonderful sort of character throughout. There are sort of little anecdotes of his that kind of show him to be a rather witty chap who was the opposite of what you think of an emperor. Sort of, not at all the arrogant fellow, if you know what I mean. Because he, in a way, realised that he kind of got there by accident.
It's exactly what you want in a leader, really, isn't it? Someone who will listen to your concerns and then reply with his most amusing witticism.
Well, put it like this, to give you an idea of it. After Nero, after Nero fell and Vespasian takes over, the state coffers are completely empty. Nero, with his extravagance, has ruined the Roman state, if you know what I mean. So Vespasian is desperately looking for anything to tax in order to bring in money.
Mm-hmm.
So he started putting a tax on latrines, on public latrines, where you could kind of, literally spend a penny, if you know what I mean. So you would pay, obviously, some doorman or something like that, and then... So there would be some profit to be made there.
Like, you put in your 2 denarii and the state takes 1. I mean, what kind of times are we living in?
So he taxed those. And his son Titus was outraged and said, how could you possibly tax something like this? I mean,
people are shitting in the streets, father!
It's just unbecoming of somebody who's supposed to be an emperor. That you're, and Vespasian kind of just looked at him and turned round and asked one of the servants, go down to the treasury and bring me a bag full of the coinage that has been collected as tax from the urinals. And lo and behold, they bring a bag with the coins in, and Vespasian reached inside, took a handful of coins, held it up to Titus's face and go, see, it doesn't smell. And it's those kind of things that make Vespasian just lovable. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, or hateable. In that case, you're not getting my point, but it's not stinky, is it? Oh god, can you say it in ancient Roman?
I'm afraid I can't say it in Latin.
Oh, it's
no.
a shame. It's a real shame. That would have been very clippable as well.
I'm sure we are now going to be bombarded with Latin versions. See, it doesn't smell.
Matchstick donated $5. Says 19-year-old Britisher was the first. Oh no, 19-year-old the Scottisher was the first to use a claymore. So there you are.
Is that the mine or the sword?
Presumably the sword, given the context of the Scottish, and not a small packed explosive.
He was thinking round corners here,
and not a small packed explosive filled with lead, ball bearings. Architect of Fate has donated $5. Says anyone who doesn't have an acceptable candidate should write either Cicero or Count Dankula in their respective constituencies. Oh yes, I do quite like that one. And Object of Hate has donated to CHF, which I always forget what that currency is, but thank you so much, and says 20-year-old Britisher renamed Britannia to England. Why would you do such a thing, Britisher? And why would you not call it... I mean, you're named after Britannia. Why would you besmirch her in such a way?
I mean, England is named after the Angles. I'm sorry, that had nothing to do with me.
But you told the Angles where to go.
Well, there was that. Then again, rumor has it there is one of your supporters who normally is always around to tell us that we started 32 seconds late.
The great Sitsgoen, yes.
Yes, I think he's in Angles territory, is he not?
He's certainly in axing range, yes. He's remarkably silent of late. I do hope he's all right.
Yes, we'll see how far he can hurl a Francisca.
Good reference. Right. So I suppose we must come on to back to the voting side of things. And I do have a couple of light-hearted things to end the stream off later, but we're not quite there yet. So Invidious had said, I believe that students should not have the franchise in their university constituencies. Rather, they should vote at home. Why should I, a temporary resident of my university town, have an equal voice to the permanent residents of the town? They'll live with the consequences of my vote, whereas I won't. If students want parliamentary representation at their universities, why not bring back the university constituencies? But personally, I'm against the creation of landless constituencies. Addendum, I also believe that voting in any other way than in person at the polling station is, if the person has both the competence and ability to do such, dishonourable. What do we make of this, gentlemen? Tailed, perhaps if you could take this one.
I don't even know university constituencies were ever a thing. Maybe that's... I don't know if we ever had that in here. I've never heard of them.
Yeah, I've never heard of the concept of a university being a constituency to itself. But the idea, I'm kind of behind the idea of people being able to vote in a university constituency.
Why not just use a postal vote from your original home address?
It depends, really. It depends. I can see there's utility in allowing you to vote if you're going to be there for a set number of years. However, yes, it is. I can understand the other side of the coin as well, which is saying, actually, you don't live here, you don't represent us. Why are you voting? I'm personally voting.
And it does provide a very handy left-wing massive voting bloc. in those particular constituencies,
Well,
doesn't
you
it?
think it would be suitably diffuse across the rest of the UK, that it would just completely ruin students as a potential voting bloc at all?
Well, I mean, I think the universities do have a significant influence where they are when it comes to the voting bloc they supply.
Really? I'm surprised by that, given how few students vote
Hmm.
at all, because they don't take the
I would say,
15 minutes.
however smaller percentages is, if you look something like Manchester University, I would be, you know, I really think that they would poll pretty heavily.
I can get behind it. I understand the concept. It would be bloody inconvenient, but I could get behind it. Especially if you're at university far away. But yes, there we go. People are still talking about the comment you made, Britisher, about how money doesn't smell.
Well, it wasn't me; it was Vespasian.
Say, I think it's horrible because the money isn't smelling itself. Danish money used to smell horribly, apparently.
I like how someone has actually tried to put it into.
Well,
Latin.
actually,
Pisius does not so smell us.
actually, this is quite a good. That's quite a good. If you ever in the past, if is there anybody of sufficient age around who, in the chat, who remembers counting money, bundles of actual cash. Whether you were a cashier or anything like that, you had to deal with money. The smell of it was hideous. So nowadays, obviously, now they've introduced these plastic notes. But you also have to consider that it's really only sort of in the last 20 years or so that the banks really started seriously, constantly exchanging money. So any old notes are constantly filtered out and sent back to the Bank of England.
Mm.
Whereas prior to that, you could have quite old notes that were in circulation. And once all those notes, have been through thousands and thousands of hands, they, with them being paper, this kind of cloth-like paper,
Yeah.
take on the smell. And if you have got bundles, if you smelt a bundle of money, it was quite intense.
Very sweaty.
I mean, there was a how shall we say, there was a toiletry, an agricultural smell to it, put it like that.
Eau de manure, yes.
Yes, eau de manure, yes. I just wonder whether there's anybody sort of old enough out there in the chat to recall that, because I definitely remember money stinking. And then at some point, they started constantly circulating basically taking them out of circulation, the old notes, and that cleared things up considerably. And now that they've gone to the plastic notes, I mean, we've still got some paper notes, but now that they've gone to the plastic notes, that's eliminated it completely.
Yes, they're at least machine washable when it comes to those. Colin P. Smith does also mention, if you'll excuse the motorbike loudly grumbling outside my window.
I just for a moment thought you were suffering terrible indigestion.
No, I'm afraid not. As much as I know you desire my death more and more with every day, Britisher. Colin P. Smith mentions that raising the voting age to 25 would largely solve the problem of the student vote, which, I could get behind even more.
Either that, or it would keep them at university even longer.
I mean, the average age that a child now leaves home in this country is 26. So imagine how many people who leave home early who bring that average down, and how many are still there at 35. Which brings that average up.
I mean, a lot of that has to do with housing shortage rather than.
Well, it is, but it's also it's more to do with housing price a lot of the time. The new IKB 4472 has chimed in with £2. Your name is really inconvenient to say, but I do appreciate the super chat nonetheless. And says, election fraud in any form should be treason. I mean, I think treason is a bit far. But it's
I think that's a bit. I think that's a bit steep.
But given that, you should be hanged, especially given the number of false where it's just because someone has ticked the wrong box, as it were, or you get bizarre cases.
So how many of the and I know people will immediately start saying, "Oh well, yes, but the other side did it too." But that's not the point I'm trying to make. I would like to know of those people who would be the hardliners here, how many Brexiteers should be strung up for financial irregularities in the Brexit referendum?
All of them. But yes,
if it's treasonous and it's this,
look,
and it's that,
I think I don't.
What I'm trying to say is apply it to your own and then see what you think.
I don't care really particularly about that. I just think that all politicians who currently exist on this earth should be burnt, and then we could get some new ones in, perhaps.
Just burnt. Yeah, so you actually.
I mean, they keep talking about the fact that they need to renovate the Houses of Parliament, so why not? People saying you're a bit far. I like how
the building with them in it.
Yeah, potentially. So I like the fact that I've said that election fraud being treason is a bit far, and yet I'm quite happily to burn the Houses of Parliament to the ground with the staff still in it. Yes,
that's going to get clipped.
No, it is not going to get clipped. My audience, I think you'll find, is respectful. And definitely won't take advantage of the fact that I say things which were probably chargeable as a hate crime in today's, environment.
Well, and the question simply is, what isn't chargeable as a hate crime?
It's true. So, have either of you managed to take a gander at the Labour or the Conservative manifesto?
It may surprise you, but I had more interesting things to do than to try and read the manifestos.
Than to try.
I've heard various highlights, but that was about it. I really didn't. I didn't want to bore myself, if you know what I mean.
So the interesting things with these, aside from the fact that I think it would be interesting if we forced every manifesto to be limited to something like 20 pages, right? The Labour manifesto is 107 pages long.
The Little Red Book?
Sorry?
How long is the Little Red Book by comparison?
I don't know, actually, off the top of my head.
How small is the print?
Yes, indeed. Like, is it like the Lilliput dictionary I have, which is a fully typed out dictionary? It's just very, very small. And the Conservative Party manifesto, which is 64 pages long, and has Boris giving a really awkward thumbs up on the front page of it. But
it should just be a couple of pages long, and just one page says "get," the next one says "Brexit," the next one says "done." Right. Whereas the Labour Party one should be "second referendum now," and the Liberal Democrat one should be "I can't type." I don't know how to read, or something like that. I don't know.
I heard when it came to the Tory party referendum that there were very large pictures.
The manifesto, you mean, as opposed to the referendum?
Sorry. When it came to the Tory manifesto, there were very large pictures, thus limiting the amount of text that the 50-odd pages actually contain.
Oh, yes, that's great. Because it's your favourite thing to do on a Monday evening, we are going to go through these. So it is your
evil villainous swine.
It is your choice whether or not we go red or blue. Do you want the red pill or the blue pill?
Oh dear.
He went there, Tailed. He went there.
Indeed.
I'm not even going to dignify that with a response.
Yeah, like everything.
Although having said that, British, you're the red one in this situation, and I'm the blue one. If we go by uniforms.
So I'll let the chat decide.
Oh yes, there is that. Yes.
We'll let and the Lib Dem manifesto is 96 pages, but let's face it, I'm not going to read a 14% polling party's manifesto on this stream. We'd be here forever.
So that's the end of UKIP then, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, very much so. Hence why I've left. But the right. If you're in the chat right now, I want you to say whether or not you wish us to go through the Labour manifesto first or the Tory manifesto. And we shall check in about...
1 for Labour and 2 for Tories.
I would, except that YouTube actually censors if you spam 1. So we would only end up with 2. But it's a great way to commit, polling fraud for your own thing. That sort of thing. I did see an interesting clip whilst we were waiting for that to come in of how the Epstein proceedings are going along. Because the new Department of Justice, I think it is, or the head of that particular prison where he was, where he died. Let's put it that way. Not he committed suicide. He died.
He expired.
Yes, during which he expired. He
exhaled and then no longer inhaled.
There is a great clip, which has her being absolutely railed by Lindsey Graham and a chap named Sass, which is a good name, and him basically going, but why are you so incompetent? But why are you so incompetent for about 10 minutes? It's great, very entertaining.
Funny people in the chat are now typing Labour LT12.
Oh, amazing! Right. Oh, what I can see, Tory, because AA did Labour last night. Oh, did I miss a Labour Party stream? Okay, that's a shame.
Oh, can I just point out that I like what Architect's Fate said. #Woad pill.
Yeah, yes, he said in $2 saying take the woad pill.
Sorry, he mentioned it in a comment earlier.
Aaron Hook also says to the Britisher, illegitimi non carborundum.
Illegitimi non carborundum.
Indeed.
Dear God, I have heard this before.
Translate Britisher.
I wish I could. I know this, but it doesn't ring it. But I can't put my finger on it right now.
You are a waste of skin. Why do I have?
I once had a Latin teacher. I assure you. I
mean, even I know the first word is illegitimate. Come on.
I was truly one of the least talented Latin pupils of all times. So really, I am truly the wrong person. Yes, there is supreme irony in that. I don't dispute it, Tailed. Not at all.
It means don't let the bastards grind you down, Britisher. That's the rough.
Yes, that's the one, isn't it? That's the famous line that that Tory minister had engraved into the gold watch he sent to Asl Nadir.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah, there was the scandal someone in the 90s when I think it was one of Major's ministers got involved in a scandal because Asl Nadir was this I think he was a Cypriot businessman who got sort of pulled up on all sorts of fraud charges and whatever here in Britain. And this minister was a personal friend of his, sent him a watch in which was engraved, "Don't let the bastards get you down." And the moment that somehow became public knowledge, of course, this minister was immediately, completely sort of involved in scandal and whatever. He couldn't extricate himself anymore, if you know what I mean, because he had spoken to someone who may be a criminal, that kind of thing. So it became quite a famous line.
Interesting. It is
non carborundum.
I mean,
yes.
it is a Pig Latin aphorism, if it helps. So you can be forgiven.
I doubt it's the most classical of Latin.
Unless you're really into
unless qui bono, yes.
Illegitimate silicon carbide is really is what it actually means. Direct translation. Otherwise. Right, so judging by what the chat says, people want to see whether or not the Labour Manifesto breaks me like it does AA. Were you on this stream, Britisher, out of curiosity, or did AA do it by himself?
Was I on
a stream with AA when he was broken by the Labour Manifesto?
No, I was not.
Oh, right.
I didn't have that
privilege. Privilege, yes. Right, well, let's have a look at to get Brexit done, unleash Britain's potential by the Tory party first, so that we can get there, and we'll save the real ball-breaking stuff for later. So this is all
well-breaking.
My guarantee is already misstyled after Boris telling us directly, if there is a majority of Conservative MPs on December 13th, I guarantee I will get our New Deal through Parliament. Why? He doesn't say why or how. But we will get Brexit done in January, just like we were going to get it done in October, and unleash the potential of our whole country, blah, blah. Guarantee, okay, here are the key pledges. Extra funding for the NHS, 50,000 more nurses, 50 million more GP surgery appointments a year. Although the way that's written, don't you think, makes it sound like he's going to make it so that people have to book 50 million more GP surgery appointments per year. If they don't, then he's going to mandate them. You'll get a letter through your door saying you are to turn up to your GP appointment at this time and on this date. Otherwise, that's the problem. It says extra funding, but it doesn't say how much. I mean, they've been plugging extra funding into the NHS. Most of the NHS issues that I've seen stem from, obviously I've spent a lot of time in the NHS recently, in particular, thanks to my father having the damned bad luck of having a stroke. And the biggest issue that we've seen is things like people wasting time, people misallocating resources, and people stealing stuff. So that's not a great start anyway. Maybe it's just the hospitals I've been visiting. But, the staff themselves, when it comes to the patient care, it's been lovely. And it's been a real mixed bag, however. And to say that there are not problems with kleptomaniacs and all sorts of problems with the way the NHS is structured is to put it lightly. And I don't think throwing extra money at it's going to help. And I also think that basically reducing immigration is the fastest and easiest way to take pressure off the NHS. Any thoughts on this one, gentlemen?
What exactly are you asking us?
What you think of his pledge to add extra funding to the NHS, an extra 50,000 nurses and 50 million more GP surgery appointments.
The reason I had to ask is because you did the long tangent, and I wasn't sure whether you were asking us to comment on the tangent or the actual.
Oh, I see. I've given my opinion, and now I'm asking.
When it comes to the 50,000 nurses, that's a controversial one, isn't it? Because it's not that he's going to recruit 50,000 nurses. It's that he wishes to end with a 50,000 higher total, which means what he intends to do is seek to retain more nurses.
I see what you're saying. Yes.
So this is one of those, as in exactly measure, if you know what I mean.
You cut out for a second there. If you could just say again.
So it's one of those questions of how exactly are we going to measure it when we come to it. So there are going to be some additional recruitments overseas, but by and large, I believe the lion's share, one believes, is going to come from retention.
That wouldn't surprise me, because they tried to do the same thing with the military and everyone left. And they had a problem because they said, well, we have this target to cut personnel, right? But we want to reduce the intake, and we want to retain more people, right? And what ended up happening was everyone went, this is awful, all our career progression has stalled, so all the people in the mid-level just left. And they reached their target for troop dispersal, as it were, something like 6 years early, which is a huge problem. It's not them being efficient; it's that they actually suddenly have this massive deficit of troops that they didn't expect to have. They didn't expect to.
As long as they don't end up in a war, they're fine. It's just if suddenly they're called upon, they might suddenly realise that there's a certain lack of personnel in certain areas.
The issue I have with this is they don't seem to have. If they're going to kick some money around, which is apparently what they want to do. I don't understand why they haven't talked more. He hasn't talked more about pushing money into polytechnics and that sort of thing, or academies, I think they are now, so that they can, they can put out nursing programs so that they can train more nurses, and therefore, when they want to retain more people, hopefully, the influx of nurses takes a lot of the load off the older nurses, so they want to stick around more so they can impart their knowledge, so you have a new groundwork. But again, I don't know if I haven't seen anything from Labour, but I haven't seen anything from any major political party at all which talks about the idea of putting money into education to try and train young people in the same way that they just say, we're going to magic these out of thin air. Either we're going to retain them, we're going to import them, or we're going to put more money in their pockets, so they're going to stick around. It's difficult. Any thoughts, Tailed?
You pretty much made the only points I was going to make, to be fair.
Fair enough. 20,000 more police and tougher sentencing for criminals is the next pledge. When it comes to the police, I mean, I think they're sorely needed. I think the experiment of cutting the police, however, I don't like the fact that they are not frontline police. I don't like that they're not all frontline police, but we'll see how that goes. I think
in total figures, it will take the police back up to where it was.
Yes. So it's one of those things where can they account for this idea that the reduction in, shall we say, knife crime in Birmingham and London is worth the extra bobbies on the street? I think potentially, but I think that the management of the police force has been a large part of its failing, so it's very difficult to say. What I don't want to see is 3,000 of those 20,000 becoming hate crime Twitter police officers and sitting there in another office, basically saying, you're committing wrong thing. What do we make of? I mean, I don't know what all three of our sort of positions are on how we would want to control immigration, for instance. But the Australian-style points-based system to control immigration. What do you think? What do we make of that?
To me, it seems pretty reasonable, but it's not. I've never really heard any alternatives to that, so I don't really know.
Well, the way I would put it is, in the end, what matters is the result, not necessarily the means by which they go about it. And when it comes to the result, both sides have sounded fairly iffy. So when Corbyn was pressed on his immigration intentions, it was, oh, well, he wants a fair system. Well, yes, but what does that mean? Oh, well, he wants it to be fair. Well, more or, fewer immigrants. He wishes it to be fair. And when they tried the same thing with Priti Patel, who is the Home Secretary, we want to have immigration control. Well, yes, but what do you want? Do you want more? Do you want fewer? What do you want?
Yeah, because they've axed the concept of hard targets, haven't they?
Yes.
In terms of numbers.
And in the end, the question simply is, what is the result of what you're producing?
And again, Australian style doesn't necessarily mean that the bar to entry isn't going to still be low.
Precisely. So it really, I'm sure with the system you have now, if you make it tighter, you will get fewer immigrants. And it's always also a matter of, where are you having immigration from? And I think those are kind of the more important things, really, than just the system by which you do it. So I think to a certain extent there is a bit of sort of razzle-dazzle going on, as in, look at the disco ball on the ceiling,
yes.
on the lights, nice.
We have a shiny.
Actually, what are you going to do?
It's a shiny new coat of paint, as far as I'm concerned, and it doesn't really do anything because until it comes to fruition, we won't see what the net result of it is. What has been interesting, though, when it comes to immigration, is I wish I had the graph in front of me. I've seen the graph which says that EU immigration has dipped down, non-EU immigration has gone up by about the same margin, and that the numbers are still going up overall exponentially, especially compared to the number of immigrants we have, expats. But and I'm curious, given that Western European immigration was the major part of the the pro-immigration crowd's argument in favour of immigration, because they tend to they're a net positive. The Eastern Europeans are about neutral, and everyone else is a net negative when it comes to tax contributions and that sort of thing. So I'm curious whether or not we're at the tipping point of if we're going to bring in a new system and it's going to involve a lot of non-EU, especially non-Western EU migration, what the point system will bring to bear on that, whether or not it's going to be tight or whether or not they're going to say, well, we're out of Europe now, let's open the doors, basically. Millions more invested every week in science, schools, apprenticeships, and infrastructure while controlling debt. Well, that's as far as I'm concerned, a bit of a nothing. It's like saying we're going to put money into things, and we're going to do it sustainably. I mean, it's not, the track record on doing that is not great, and really without specifics, it's a bit pointless. Reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050 with investments in clean energy solutions and green infrastructure to reduce carbon and pollution. What do you make of this?
Don't believe them for a start.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's really particularly possible. I mean,
it's one of those.
I'm all for.
Yeah, go on.
I'm all for like reducing the amount of pollution and stuff, but I wouldn't trust the government to do it.
No.
Well, I would say again, it sort of depends on what sort of policies they're thinking of. I mean, if for example they would get the ability to say not only retain car manufacture in Britain, but they would be able to expand it. Do you really think they would turn it down if they sort of felt, oh well, yes, but increasing our manufacturing base will actually increase pollution? Do you understand what I mean? They would never say, oh well, no, we don't want those. It just wouldn't happen. And then you contrast that with, do you remember the Michael Gove proposal that I believe went nowhere eventually, whereby he wanted to ban any open fires in houses?
Oh yes, I seem to recall that because I had an open fire at the time.
No one would be permitted to have an open fireplace because Michael Gove said so.
That was right. Not even wood burning stoves or anything like that. Yeah.
And you kind of looked at that and you went, I'm sorry, but it's precisely that sort of thing that is kind of a bit out of your mind.
I'm sorry, but winter is coming, We'll all freeze to death, but at least we'll be carbon neutral.
Well, yes, but, those kind of things may, because what they were talking about, sort of particle pollution and stuff like that, I could imagine that might make a difference in a place like London or Birmingham. But, pick some small village in Derbyshire and tell me that that's actually causing any great level of pollution. And that's where it's completely unrealistic.
Yeah, no, I agree. Not to mention the fact that this seems to me to be, again, a nothing policy. They are basically talking about something which is 30 years in the future. And as we all know, politicians rarely think more than 4 years in the future. So it's one of those things, or at least this electoral term, right? 5 years, 7 years, whatever it is. And so this may as well say nothing. They can make all the aspersions to it or not. But if another party gets in and says, "Well, we're going to ramp up manufacturing," then it doesn't make a jot of difference. We will not raise the rate of income tax, VAT, or national insurance. Well, I mean that's I think it should be dropped personally, but at least that's something. I don't see a particular. I mean, it's advocating the status quo when it comes to taxation. So unless you have any particular grievances when it comes to taxation, apart from the fact that the sugar tax is bollocks. Is there anything you want to say on this? No, then that will be the no.
It's hard to comment when the suggestion is effectively the status quo.
Yes, I know what you're saying. Okay, so we're into. I'm going to skip most of the introduction because the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 statements all start with or contain the words "Get Brexit done."
There's a surprise.
And that's it. And how proud he is of the achievements of the government in its first 100 days. Basically, technology is good. There are parts of the country that feel left behind, as always. Thinking Wales and the north of England. And how we should believe passionately in opportunity and that sort of thing. For a second there, I thought they were going to say they're going to nationalise the Northern Powerhouse Rail, but then They're not. They're investing in the Midlands Rail Hub and the Northern
Well, I
Panels.
think they want a railway line between Manchester and Leeds, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so. Which is basically
When it comes to, by the way, when it comes to nationalisation of railway, that's not such a big thing as some people make out.
Mhm.
Because effectively, the tracks already are national.
Yes.
I mean, they had privatised them, and it went belly up, and it basically they inherited it back, if you know what I mean. So they came to the conclusion that they couldn't really privatise it. And meanwhile, the way of simply nationalising the rail operators is simply to let their licence expire.
Yeah.
And then you get it back for free. So then you either sell the licenses again to other operators, or you simply keep it. So as such, you can effectively renationalise the railways without additional cost. So that then becomes an ideological question as opposed to you having to buy something, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not going to be like when they sold off the post office, when they basically did a load of dirty deals and sold everything off for 4 times cheaper than it was actually worth, and that sort of thing.
And very much against the popular will.
And very much against the popular will. Lots of attacks that I can see on the Labour Party, probably well deserved. Jeremy Corbyn detests the profit motive so viscerally and would raise tax so wantonly that they would destroy the very basis of this country's prosperity. He's basically he's putting out statements then saying what Jeremy Corbyn would do in his own words afterwards. Proud of our armed forces and would always fund them properly. Yeah, but you'll mismanage them into the ground at the same time, which is what we've been seeing now for many years, and they are underfunded as it is. Yes.
Well, then again, perhaps if they went into a war in the, they would make sure that when their troops arrived in the Middle East, they would actually have their bulletproof vests with them.
Yeah, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? The worst thing was when...
as opposed to the Labour attempt.
Yes, I remember.
Were you around to hear that? When...
Oh,
when
yes, we studied it.
Minister, when we had the Defence Minister tell us how this was logistically very, very difficult to do. It's not as simple as just... And you just thought, really? This is
your own job. This is your only job. Your job is to get the bloody, get our troops out there and all the equipment.
If you cannot lay on an additional transport to take the vests to where they need to be, fine. Then take the vests to the airport, and when your troops get on the airplane,
hand them a vest.
One of them a vest.
Yes, we had a we had to study this because we were looking at things like air-land integration and stuff like that, which is where the Air Force and the Army work together. And they were also talking about when they pulled out of Kandahar and how all the equipment went a week before the troops did. Well, before the bulk of the troops did. And so you have people there and they're going, yeah, like we're all sleeping in our cot. We've got no weapons, effectively. We've got nothing. We've got kettles.
They were all sitting on rocks, playing cards with each other on cardboard boxes.
We've got kettles, but not much else. So that's what we lived on for the last week, and it was just like, oh, for goodness sake. Yes, logistics in the military are always problematic.
But then again, if I remember rightly, the enlightened view of the government at the time was that they wanted to leave all the equipment in Afghanistan.
Oh yes, they wanted to leave a lot. But as people,
there was such a public outcry as to, hang on a moment, how much has all this stuff cost, and now we're leaving it there? So then they decided, oh well, they're going to move it back home nonetheless.
Oh yes,
sort of grudgingly.
And they prioritised it clearly. But they did silly things as well because it was moved modularly. So they had things like they moved all the irons but not the ironing boards, and so everyone had these ironing boards that they had around.
Yes,
and nothing to iron on.
That reminds me of Bügeleisennacht.
But
as someone who was once in the RAF, have you heard of Bügeleisennacht?
I've heard of Kristallnacht, but that's slightly different.
No. Bügeleisennacht is one of the greatest achievements of the British Air Force ever.
Oh, well, I'm terribly embarrassed. Do talk.
Well, imagine a situation where you are sending bomber after bomber after bomber over Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And, you obviously have to produce new planes by the wagon load. You have to produce new pilots and crews by the wagon load. But so too, do you actually have to produce bombs by the wagon load? Because obviously these bombers have to take bombs with them.
Yes, otherwise they fly empty.
Now imagine a situation whereby you run out of bombs. So you've got the bomber crew and you've got the bombers, but you haven't necessarily got sufficient bombs. So what do? Do you just not send those bombers and just send the other ones?
Well, it depends, doesn't it? It depends whether or not you...
Or do you load those bombers with whatever dead weight you can find? So that, given that they're dropping this stuff from 10,000 feet or whatever, by the time it arrives down below, it will be traveling with such speed that if you kind of, drop a lump of rock...
Then it'll have a similar effect.
It will have a similar effect. It will go through a building like butter, if you know what I mean. So what they did is they just loaded several of these heavy bombers just with scrap metal.
Right.
One particular favourite were flat irons. So, actual things with which you would do the ironing.
Amazing.
So a lump of iron that you would heat up, if you know what I mean.
Imagine arriving at the Pearlies with, just a big flat iron just through your face.
You are, I believe it was in Hamburg. So you open your bomb bay doors and it just rains flat irons on Hamburg.
And teach them the
and
glory.
Of course, the word, the word for flat iron in German is Bügeleisen.
Mm-hmm.
So they were just amazed to see it literally raining flat irons.
It's a miracle.
And obviously these things, they thumped through buildings. If you can imagine they were doing some serious harm, but they weren't exploding.
As someone who has
walking in Hamburg, it became famed as Bügeleisen-Nacht, the night of the flat irons.
Oh my! That is fascinating. How marvelous! If I had points to give you, I would give them to you. Thank you for that rather interesting anecdote. But back to the Tory manifesto. Sorry, they're so similar. I get them confused. So basically, a load of nothing again. We'll stand for our country and our values around the world. We don't know how to define our values or really our country at this moment, but we'll stand for them. We will respect the democratic will of the people. More Brexit. We're going to invest. Okay, so let's move on to just get Brexit done. Again, this is also woolly. The trouble with Brexit is until it happens and negotiations actually start taking place for new trade deals, etc., and they could say literally any old bollocks, as far as I'm concerned, and it would mean nothing until we actually sit down at the negotiating table and work out what we can and what we can't work out. However, I do quite like the idea of taking back control of our laws, taking back control of our money, and control of our own trade policy. I mean, that's really the whole point. The interesting thing, I think what is a sleeping kind of landmine when it comes to the or sea mine, as it were, when it comes to Brexit, is the fishing waters dispute, because the French fishermen are not very happy about anything that's going on with the fishing waters. And to the point where it's been called, I've seen articles which call it things like the Little War, back between the French and the English, where boats are ramming each other for fishing waters.
Well, I think when it comes to the boats ramming each other over fishing waters, that has much to do with when one thinks it right to fish in certain areas. So I believe the French are prohibited by their government from fishing in certain territories, in certain shared waters, because one wishes to stock to recuperate. But the British have a different timetable for that.
Right.
So there has been situations where the British have turned up at times when the French are prevented from going out and fishing.
Yeah.
So the French see that as, hang on a moment, at a time when we're told that we shouldn't fish, we should allow the stock to recuperate, you are coming into these waters and fishing them.
Yeah.
And that's why they have, there've been these pictures of fishing vessels literally ramming each other. But I believe those are actually French waters. I could be wrong.
I'm not sure. I've seen a mix, but all I know is, yes, people are mentioning in the chat, it's the Great Scallop War, they call it, that sort of thing. But yes, so going back to Brexit more in general, the only way to deliver Brexit is with a Conservative majority in Parliament. Blah blah blah. We're all familiar with the Brexit policy, shall we say? But here's unleashing Britain's potential. Let's see what the Conservatives want to do. So first of all, they claim the Conservatives have been cleaning up Labour's mess. I mean, there's no doubt that it was a mess. Some of the decisions Labour made are kind of irreversible at this point. But did the Conservatives actually succeed in bringing down the deficit? I thought they brought it down to pre-Labour levels, but we're still running a deficit, as far as I'm aware. Is that correct?
I think it's what they call a structural deficit. Dear God, there are these various sort of definitions, but the runaway deficit that we had at the time when the Tories came to power, there was that famous joke left behind by the Treasury Minister, the Labour one.
Oh, there is no money, yeah.
I'm afraid there's no money left or whatever, which, in all fairness, I thought the Tory Lib Dem coalition treated with ill humour, because clearly it was meant as a joke. But no, when it comes to that, yes, they did bring it down quite a lot. But then that's why we had cuts in police force numbers. That's why we had cuts in prison guard numbers. So many of the problems were brought about by this desperate need to get control of a situation.
Yes, and I don't think that they managed it particularly well. They got there in the end, if we can call it that. But it's also an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's not we got down now, so we have this deficit where we want it. Right, marvellous. Let's see what we can do with our new budgets. No, it's now we can start spending again. This is the idea that they're now like, oh, we finally got our finances under control. Oh, but there's a letter for a new credit card that's just come through the door.
In all fairness, I think a lot of it is window dressing and whatever. So there has been some figures, I think, put out either by Labour or the Lib Dems, in which they are kind of trying to show how progressive and willing to spend they are, if you know what I mean.
Oh yes.
So I think I could be, forgive me if I'm misremembering this, but I think the Labour Party is somewhere up at £80 billion additional expenditure.
Oh, we'll get to them.
The Lib Dems are somewhere at £60 billion additional expenditure.
Mm-hmm.
And the Tories were kind of displayed as being somewhere at £2.6 billion additional expenditure.
Well, I know they want to put 20 billion into the NHS or something. So
yes, much depends on what the economy is projected to grow and whatever as to. You mean that expenditure is borrowing, I believe.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yes.
So that my mistake. But that kind of showed that the Tory position seemed much more under control.
So I think the
Tories are kind of beating the drum, trying to do a bit of razzmatazz, as in, oh, we're going to spend, because the current mood in politics is this: we need to spend money, we need to end austerity, and therefore I think Boris Johnson is keen to be kind of seen as at least with one foot on that bandwagon. Just as an insurance policy when it comes to the electorate.
So what I can see here is he's saying, we will not borrow to fund day-to-day spending, but will invest thoughtfully and responsibly in infrastructure across the country.
I believe that is what's called a structural deficit. Yeah. So if what you are borrowing is actually in order to put into things, rather than just spending it on your daily on what you need to keep things running on a daily basis.
I like that they have a cap, right? So if their debt interest reaches 6% of the revenue that they are making from their investments, then they'll reconsider. Basically, they will reassess our plans to keep debt under control, which at least gives this idea that at least someone will have an eye on the books this time round.
Well, I think when it comes to the Tories, they have a much better reputation when it comes to sort of fiscal prudence.
Yeah.
And I'm sure somebody will no doubt Google structural deficit and then tell me that I'm completely misremembering this, which may well be possible.
Indeed. Apologies to anyone who heard me blow my nose. I thought I'd muted the mic, but apparently not.
Yes, I'm actually equally worried whether people can constantly hear me typing.
No.
Because I think my mute button has failed here again.
So moving on, it says, we will focus on your priorities. In his first months in office, the Prime Minister has shown he intends to make life better for everyone in the UK. Well, is that what we get from Boris, is it? We've listened to you, we've acted. None of this will happen without a Conservative majority government. We're going to strengthen the NHS and social care. Let me see what we've got here. We are proud to have confirmed a record £34 billion per year by the end of Parliament in additional funding for the NHS, and have begun working on building is a specific word, 40 new hospitals across the country. Now, I've heard controversy about this. Is it actually 40 thing?
Yeah, I've also heard that is a bit all over, and there are various claims that it might be as low as half a dozen.
As 6.
It very much depends what you actually... Because they're talking about seed money having gone into the beginnings of projects, so there may be things underway, but they are not being built yet, if you know what I mean.
It says, building 40 new hospitals as well as investing in hospital upgrades and new machines to boost early cancer diagnosis. This would suggest, of course, that, hospital upgrades are separate, although, according to certainly the Channel 4 debate they watched, that most of these new hospitals are merely revitalized hospitals where they are upgrading the hospital and giving it a new these new wards and that sort of things designed for specific conditions. Whether or not that counts as a new hospital, I think we'll need to look at what counts as a new hospital.
Well, when it comes to new hospitals, I am always reminded of Yes Minister.
Sorry, Admiral Belsdale says many of them are Lego sets. Yes, we're reminded of Yes Minister when he wants to close the new hospital, but there's over 300 administrative staff who are working there, isn't it?
Yes, but not a single member of medical staff.
No doctors, and what about the patients?
Isn't it that they've just finished building the hospital?
Yes.
And just as the hospital is being completed, there are budget cuts.
Yes, and they need to get rid of it.
Given that they are laying off staff in other hospitals and other wards, that they can't therefore justify opening another hospital, because it would just mean more layoffs in other hospitals.
Yes, I believe Bernard.
They kind of conspire to keep scaffolding and skips and whatever around the hospital to make it look as if the building hadn't been completed yet.
They're not going to say anything but hope that people don't notice. Yes, that's what Bernard says has happened. And by the end of the episode, he says, well, I've decided I'm not going to close the hospital anymore. And he says, well, look at it this way, Minister, you've saved 300 jobs. And that's the way they spin it to the press. Instead of the story he was going to release about closing the hospital. Right, so here's the NHS plan. Let's have a look, see. We will have raised funding for the NHS by 29% between 2018 and 2023, which includes an investment of over £650 million extra a week. It's quite a lot of money, given that it already costs about between 2 and 4 billion per week, I think it is at the moment. Can't remember specifically. Okay, so building and funding 40 new hospitals over the next 10 years on top of 20 hospital upgrades we announced in the summer, and roll out new cancer diagnostic machines to 78 hospital trusts, and continuing to repair the damage done by Labour's disastrous PFI deals. Okay. There's quite an interesting... that government has always been terrible at making deals with contractors, regardless whether it's Labour or the Conservatives.
Well, those PFI deals were calamitous, to be honest.
I will, yes, give them that.
I've not really heard of a good one. So yes, in that respect, I think the Labour Party of the Labour government of Messrs Blair and Brown has some answering to do.
Mm-hmm. The NHS People Plan says they want... Okay, so they want students to receive £5,000 to £8,000 annual maintenance grant every year during their course to help with their cost of living. That's good, because it's a grant, which means they don't have to pay it back. I'm in favour of that. Everyone receives at least £5,000 with further funding in regions or disciplines that are struggling to recruit, so including mental health sector, etc., and to help with potential childcare costs. They want 6,000 more doctors in general practice and 6,000 more primary care professionals, on top of 7,500 extra nurse associates and 20,000 primary care professionals that have already been announced. More funding for professional training, more supportive hospital management, and NHS visa. Okay. We want to train and employ tens of thousands more NHS professionals here in the UK, but we also want to make sure that those from overseas who want to work in and support the NHS specifically are encouraged to do so. This is why qualified doctors, nurses, and allied health professionals with a job offer from the NHS who have been trained to a recognised standard and have good working English will be offered fast-track entry, reduced visa fees, and dedicated support to come to the UK with their families. Any thoughts on that particular element?
So basically, one is, it will obviously be favoured in the immigration points system if they're
if you have an
coming to work for the NHS.
If you have an NHS,
I think it's fairly obvious that would be, that would be an exception.
Yeah, ties in quite nicely. Although it's quite difficult when they say things like, where is it here? Qualified doctors, fine. Qualified nurses, fine. Allied health professionals is a very broad range of different professions. So I'm hoping that that gets kind of expanded on a bit more, because that can be everyone from a counsellor, which is someone who does not actually need any professional qualification, so to speak. You don't need to want to work in counselling, all the way up to sort of actual specific osteopath, that sort of thing. Our new funding will deliver 50 million extra general practice appointments, an increase of over 15%. Well, I'll believe that when I see it, I think, given the waiting times at the moment. And they want to address doctors' pensions, so they're going to hold a review on that, but no other details really about that one. Interesting. Where were we? They want to prevent disease as well as curing it. Obviously, they want to invest in the Cancer Drugs Fund. Make the NHS the best place in the world to give birth. Well, Britisher, I know you've always been worrying about where you're going to give birth, but when your brood eventually comes to term...
Oh, don't start me on men who give birth. I spoke about that in the week that was.
Oh my.
Well, you see, the ACLU, this is the American Civil Liberties Union, for International Men's Day, decided to put out a tweet.
Oh, yes, that was right.
That, men who have periods are men. Men who get pregnant and give birth are men.
Oh, shut up. For goodness sake. Yes, indeed.
It's Basic Biology 101. Yes.
I put out a tweet and a message on Facebook. It was interesting to chart the differences between both, basically saying, Happy International Men's Day to everyone. And on Twitter, it was met basically with, yeah, that's good, a few likes here and there, and a couple of people saying, yeah, I've been thinking about this. And then on Facebook, it was like, this is bait, right? All my left-wing friends sort of chiming in, going, Every day is International Men's Day and that sort of thing. That was interesting.
Well, I just know that I don't want an International Men's Day.
I think it's.
I'm with what's he called? Morgan Freeman. You know,
it's
that famous interview of his when he's asked about Black History Month.
Yes, but
he informs his interviewer that he doesn't want a Black History Month.
Yes, because relegating his issues to a single month would be insulting. But International Men's Day is not really about sexism as much as it is about things like suicide awareness.
I don't care.
Look, like there's no one else does things in terms of the issues which predominantly affect men. Nobody does things in terms of prostate cancer, all that jazz.
This is merely this. All this. It's such and such day. It's such and such day. All this it's only for lobby groups.
You're saying it's a gateway. It's a gateway drug to progressive activism. Is that what you're saying?
It's only for lobby groups to be able to say, "Oh well, this is our chance to promote our cause for this particular day," because it's, and you just go, "Oh, to hell with it."
Well, better cancel Remembrance Day then.
And Christmas.
And Christmas, yes. Yeah. Easter, birthdays, yes. Mother's Day.
Birthdays is just a day when people lobby against you, and that's what Britishers experience of everything.
Yes, but if you try and set International Men's Day at the same level as Remembrance Day, I still say you are straining heavily there.
Oh dear.
We're just winding you up, really.
Yeah. It's almost like there's a comedy element to this show aside from anything else.
Never.
In the rest of the NHS side of things, they're trying to clamp down on health tourism. But again, I think this is just tied into their immigration policy. I'm going to start going faster because I think the trouble with this manifesto is, again, it's very woolly, a lot of this stuff. And so I want to I will skim, and I'm going to try and pin down stuff which appears
to the wool industry of this country then.
A great deal, yes. Much to the chagrin of the Welsh.
Scottish, I believe.
Scottish wool?
Yes.
Yes, all produced by native Scottish alpacas these days.
If you say so.
Welsh
yes.
away.
Do you not know that alpacas produce more and softer wool than sheep?
I thought it was made from the pelts of the wild haggis that roam the Highlands.
Oh, Britisher, is it time for your medicine again? We all know that the haggis does not really exist. It is merely an idea.
How could you say such a thing?
It's merely,
I'm never coming back on the show.
He will be saying that the Loch Ness monster is fictitious.
Merely an idea in the mind of God, my man. That's all we've got. The interesting thing, in the wake of the school strikes...
I think they're coming to fetch you for that particular haggis comment.
Yeah, so much...
Police Scotland are...
Police Scotland are coming for me, aided by the Met. So given that teachers are going on strike this week for 8 days, as far as I'm aware, the Conservatives want to raise teachers' starting salaries to £30,000, and I believe that they're currently striking at the moment to increase what is the equivalent of teacher expenses. I believe it is. So they want to raise expenses to something like £3,000 a year or £6,000 a year, sorry, from £2,000 a year that it currently is.
Is it David Lammy who's doing the lobbying for them?
No, well, yes.
He would be an expert on expenses.
He's spending all of his on Jaffa cakes, don't you know, for his staff. Let's see. We're going to back teachers and heads on discipline, support working families. They want to increase the national living wage to 10. We announced an increase in the national living wage to 2/3 of the average earnings currently forecast at £10.50 an hour. So hence why it's like £8.80 something. And why did it reach to everyone over 21? It means an average pay rise of £4,000. We're also going to abolish national insurance contributions for under 21s and apprentices under 25. So what do we make of raising the minimum wage, effectively, that they want to do as well? Nobody cares. Lovely. I should have brought AA on really for this. This should be...
Economics really isn't my strong point.
The economic side of things. I mean, I'm sure he'd be here going, there should be no minimum wage. Minimum wage ruins things, and that sort of thing.
Well, the main problem with minimum wage isn't so much the fact that you basically pay those people on the lowest rung more. The problem is that the moment you pay those people on the lowest rung more, it provides pressure on everybody else being shunted up in order to maintain sort of equidistance to where they were before on the ladder.
Not to mention the pressure it puts on employers to hire someone who's actually competent to pay off their investment. Whereas before, if the wage is lower, you can kind of get away with this idea of training someone up more on the job. Whereas you're not going to take a chance on the 16-year-old who
and you basically
has no experience.
Pressure also mounts on upping productivity, which largely means further sort of mechanization and computerization, and therefore needing fewer staff who have become more expensive.
So let's see what we got. They want to abolish the tampon tax, i.e., remove VAT from women's hygiene products, which uses the freedom we get from the EU. So clearly this is a feminist issue now. Brexit is now a feminist issue. There we are. They're going to continue the rollout of universal credit, which obviously Labour doesn't like very much.
Well, I don't think it's only Labour that doesn't like it. I think that universal credit has become discredited, if you forgive the pun.
I will not, but...
insofar as that, I mean, I was all in favour of it at first. I thought that was a worthwhile attempt to make. And then Ian Duncan Smith went off with it and made a complete hash of it. And they still haven't got it right now, several years later. And that's when you have to sort of say, look, folks, at some point, you just go back to where you were.
It was interesting because a friend of mine obviously receives... He's in a wheelchair, he receives UC payments. And he was like, the more of my disabilities that I put on the paper, the lower the payout I got was... per week and that sort of thing. It was very difficult for him actually to.
It's clearly something where they've made a complete hash of it, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to undo the knots they've created themselves.
Yeah.
And you just look at it and you just go, look, I'm sorry, but roll it out once you've actually managed to do this. So what they did is they started pilot projects in certain areas of the country, and then it showed problems. And rather than going, okay, we'll keep it in these pilot areas and we'll fix the problems and then we'll roll it out further. No,
they're just going to continue to roll it out. Yes.
They continued with the rollout, and you just think the entire idea of having pilot projects and then doing a rollout is that you sort the problems before you roll out. But that was not the way Ian Duncan Smith went about things. And yes, it was a complete mess. And lots and lots of people are now paying the price for that. And a great many people have kind of, oh, well, I don't care because these are all people on benefits, yada, yada, yada. They shouldn't be on benefits, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm sorry, but this is the system we run at the moment. And in that regard, it is upon the government to actually make sure that this system works. And they've made a complete mess of it. And yes, I would sort of say, look, go back to where you were because that system worked. And then if you want to introduce a system, make sure it works before you bring it back. Because this, to me, has all the hallmarks of... Do you remember the massive unified NHS computer system that they tried to introduce?
Oh, very well, yes.
And for years and years and years, they pressed on and tried to make it work.
Centralise!
In the end, they had to scrap it all, and billions were just flushed down the drain.
But the trouble is,
this
Britisher.
Has a feel. This has a similar feel to that NHS system.
The trouble is, Britisher, that they've lost the floppy disk which contains the old system.
Yes, well, possibly.
Indeed.
Yes, well, likely.
So it's like a 12-inch floppy disk. Can you imagine? Fix our immigration system. This is one of the key things. So obviously, hopefully, there's some more information about here about the firmer and fairer Australian-style point-based immigration system. So one of the key pledges: migrants will contribute to the NHS and have to pay in before they can receive the benefits of it. I mean, again, when it comes to the NHS as well, given how easy it is to register for, dare I mention the Germans have a system where if you are living in Germany and you're going to live in a specific borough or whatever it is, their equivalent. When you get there, it is a legal requirement for you to register with the local GP practice equivalent, but you're not allowed, and you still pay for it. I think on the door. I think they have a nominal fee when you go in, but you legally have to register with them, but you're not allowed to go to any other provider, which is interesting. But it does mean that because everyone, obviously it's EU law, so you have to carry your ID card legally over there. It's you get carded effectively on the door, and then compared to the register, and then if you are on that register, then you can actually have a GP appointment, which is interesting. So I'm curious how they're going to control for health tourism in effect when, I mean, we don't have any controls on that. You just call up and you book in, and that's that. Okay, that wasn't worthy of comment, apparently. So there we go. They basically want to have fewer lower-skilled migrants. Overall numbers should come down. British people should always be in control, apart from the NHS visa and recruiting live in the field. I mean, it all seems fairly self-explanatory as far as I can tell so far. Are people in the chat actually enjoying this, or is this something which is entertaining? Because I have a couple of stories if you're bored, we can go on and have a look at.
Still 272 people watching.
Well, I think we are simply, perhaps the pace with which we're going through, because I've got the feeling that more than likely the Labour Party thing is going to demand more time and attention of us.
Right.
And given the amount of time that the Tory manifesto is taking to get through, I just wonder whether we are intending to crack this 8-hour limit for streams.
Right. Well, I tell you what, I will skim. We'll skim through the rest of this, and then we'll move briskly on because we're about halfway through the Tory one by the looks of things. I'm just curious. They want to promote a social housing white paper, which will empower tenants and continue support the continued supply of social homes. Interestingly, I say it's interesting. It's incredibly dull, but the important thing for it is that they want to address the housing crisis. They're going to bring in a stamp duty surcharge on non-UK resident buyers, which I can get behind 100%. Hopefully that will help free up some of the housing for actual UK buyers.
Since you showed a lack of interest in your own stream there, the number has dipped a little.
Yeah, probably.
Someone in the chat suggests that you read it in a sexier voice.
Oh, I should. We will expand startup loans, which have particularly high take-up from women and BAME entrepreneurs. The British Business Bank has supported 90,000 smaller businesses with over £7 billion in investment or loans and will continue to grow. Like ASMR, not so obvious. Maybe we can get that. Okay, so they want to expand startup loans and encourage investment. Like again, we want to encourage this. We want to encourage that. We want to back this. We want to back that. But again, it's difficult to say. As far as I can tell, that's basically the Tory Party manifesto. There's nothing really insane in it. Most of it is the status quo. Most of it's what they've been doing for most of the time. There's a lot of pictures of candidates for Bosworth GP, etc., and that sort of thing. But when it comes to wraparound childcare for forces families, promoting our values and modernising the equipment and increasing the capability. I think most people in the forces would settle for things like hot water working.
Hello?
Hello?
Have I lost
Hello.
you?
You
Oh.
died.
Have I? Oh, for goodness sake! The people
You have to read that again.
people on the street. I was just going to say this appears to be the general gist of the Tory Party manifesto, and it's all fine apart from the bit on the armed forces where they're talking about modernising equipment, improving capability, and that sort of thing. And you're going, most of the SNCOs would settle for hot water in the mess, that sort of thing. Some stuff. Climate change stuff doesn't seem too insane, aside from let me see what we got here. Just prioritising, help lowering energy bills, that sort of thing. The moratorium on fracking is interesting, and not supporting fracking, even though I believe they've approved a couple of sites recently for extra shale gas fracking. Do you know about this?
Well, it's a moratorium. So, I mean, a moratorium can be lifted. So it's not a ban on fracking.
The
It's a
SNP
moratorium.
did that and then claimed that they banned it.
Mm-hmm. It's a bit tricky. As I say, when it comes to trade deals, I don't trust a word that they say. I just want to see what's going to happen with that. And the last picture is a load of workers with a cardboard thing with "We Love Boris" on it. The Conservative and Unionist Party Manifesto 2019. All right, well that's that one. Let's move on to the Labour Party Manifesto. I'll tell you what. Let's see if we can get through it in under an hour.
So this is the one that broke AA.
That apparently broke AA. And it's split into several parts. So,
according to people in the chat, he was actually laughing so hard. That's what made him what broke him, rather than cringing so much that his face turned in on itself.
So it's have five things. So
You've
it's
spoiled it for me now.
a green.
I don't know if it's true.
A green industrial revolution. Rebuilding public services, tackling poverty and inequality, the final say on Brexit, which of course we all know would not be the final say on Brexit, and a new internationalism. So let's see what we've got. Ignoring the foreword, let's have a look at the economy and energy in terms of green environmentalism.
I'm just going to go and get a drink, okay?
No problem, we'll see you in a bit. Please no. Get Mauler to read it, it's sexier apparently. Right. We must confront this change, apparently. Oh, the climate emergency. Okay. This election is about the crisis of living standards and the climate and environmental emergency. I don't think it really is. I think it's more about Brexit. But whether we are ready or not, we stand on the brink of an unstoppable change. We must confront this change while dealing with the growing inequality and insecurity in Britain. Okay. Labour led the UK Parliament. No, Labour spoke to the UK Parliament and declared a climate and environmental emergency. The next Labour government will lead the world in fighting it, with a plan to drive up living standards by transforming our economy into one low in carbon, rich in jobs, radically fairer and more democratic. Climate crisis ties us into a common fate. This election is our best hope to protect future generations from an uninhabitable planet. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we need to cut global emissions in half, which is interesting given that we're responsible for something like 2.3% of them at this point. By 2030 to have a chance at keeping global heating within safe limits, and that means acting now. The Tories wait
when they do that. Global heating.
Global heating, yes.
It's be creative with language, isn't it?
Oh, they're just hoping not to get plagiarised. That's what it is, The Tories wasted a decade serving the interests of big polluters, not big business, big polluters. Labour will use the crucial next decade to act. And the Tories slashed support for renewable energy while pushing it through dangerous fracking. Okay, so what are they going to do about it? In their own mind. Let's have a look. Oh, tackling the destruction of our planet is a question of justice for the communities at home and for abroad who are most affected by it, and for our children who will bear the consequences if we don't. Social justice will define Labour's approach and make sure the costs of the green transition fall fairly and are most borne by the wealthy and those most responsible for the problem. Yes. Let's have a look-see. They're going to create a sustainable investment board. The cost of not acting is far greater. Yes. Energy use in buildings accounts for 56% of the UK's total emissions, making it the most polluting sector. We developed the recommendations of our 30 by 2030 report to put the UK on track for a net zero carbon energy system within the 2030s and go faster if credible pathways can be found. Can you imagine the costs of putting us to net carbon neutral at by 2030?
Well, it's only 10 years. I don't know what you see as a problem there.
Yeah, only 10 years. Like we'll all go back to horse and cart, shall we?
Of course.
That sort of thing. In fact, the equestrian industries, the equine industries are really going ham in the wake of this new climate policy by the Labour government, I tell you. Although they're not allowed to shit anymore, so there is that. We would deliver nearly 90% of electricity and 50% of heat from renewable and low carbon sources by 2030. They want to build 7,000 new offshore wind turbines, 2,000 onshore wind turbines, 22,000 football pitches worth of solar panels, new nuclear power needed for energy security. Well, the only part of that I can get behind is nuclear power, provided the Chinese are not designing the station, which is what has been happening at present. So let's have a look-see. We will achieve the promise of a fair and sustainable economy, yada, yada, yada. We're putting people and planet and profit before profit. Okay, so averting climate catastrophe offers huge economic opportunities. We'll benefit from a green industrial revolution with the right policies, but only our ones. A new UK National Energy Agency will own and maintain the national grid infrastructure, oversee the delivery of our decarbonisation targets. They want to bring into public ownership the big six energy companies, where they will continue to supply households with energy while helping them to reduce their energy demands. What do you make of the idea of monopolising all the energy companies, Britisher?
Well, it's going to be exceedingly expensive.
But they want to just monopolise the supply arms. So I think they don't want to actually, because they must recognise how expensive it would be to buy them out. But if they have the supply arms, then they control the flow of energy into and out of the energy companies. So that might be cheaper, but who knows? Let's have a look. See, squandering of tax cuts on the rich and that sort of thing. Blah blah blah. They reckon that a green industrial revolution will create 1 million well-paid unionised jobs in the UK. What do you make of that? Oh, apparently we've lost the Britisher. There we go. It doesn't make anything of it. I don't see. Oh, am I cutting out again? Is this?
You're not cut out.
Oh, you're welcome. Welcome back, Britisher. Are you back?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, I'm having a few problems here, but yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that. Basically, there's not much going on. I tell you what, I would love to go through the Labour Party manifesto in more detail when when I've given it a proper read through. I can summarise a lot of the points a lot better, but I think it's going to take us far too long this evening to go through it. There's going to be a lot of silence, and there's going to be a lot of general umming and ahhing, and it doesn't appear to be. We don't appear to be generating too many talking points, as it were, from what's going on. So perhaps another time. I think I will bring this one to a close early, as it were. But there has been, as a last story for this evening, a Corbyn Christmas wishes hashtag trending on Twitter, which talks about how Wales is continuing to vote Labour and that sort of thing. But I find the cringe that is wishing for Corbyn Christmas wishes to be something else. Don't you agree?
Aye.
Okay.
I'm wishing for Corbyn Christmas wishes. So
Oh,
I don't quite follow. That's the problem. I think Tail might have a similar problem.
Okay, so Labour's Black PLP says, our wish for this Christmas is for a government that ensures that no one is sleeping on the streets. This will be a treat for the many who are currently suffering. Hashtag Corbyn Christmas wishes.
So his wish is for everybody to love each other and nobody to have a street.
So basically, yeah, basically. But the idea is it's not Jeremy Corbyn who's putting these out. It's about people who are effectively praying to Corbyn as the new Santa to bring Christmas wishes to fruition. Corbyn Christmas wishes. All I want for Christmas is the financial stability to put my heating on a timer, rather than waiting till my feet are numb and my breath is visible.
Oh dear God.
My Corbyn Christmas wishes are that no public sector boss will be allowed to earn more than 20 times that of their lowest paid worker, a 5% pay rise for public sector workers, the nationalisation of rail, mail, water and energy, and tax increases on the top 5% owing over £85,000.
Well, that one sounded a little too rehearsed, didn't it?
It did a little bit. What is?
Did you hear about the one about the Coca-Cola advert where they got themselves into trouble?
Oh, does it says something like Corbyn on the side, does it?
Well, they kind of I think it was inspired by the Labour Manifesto. It's got that wavy writing on it, which could remind you a bit of Coca-Cola, if you know what I mean.
Someone has.
So somebody in Momentum came up with a sort of an advertisement where they effectively changed the Coca-Cola lorries, that are all lit up in light, arriving this kind of Christmas wonderland and driving through the city.
Yeah.
They changed that because there were obviously red lorries, and I think Corbyn was Santa on the back of the lorry at the end.
Look in stream chat. Is this the one you're talking about? And we've lost the Britisher again, but apparently.
I think that's it. Yes.
Yes. With their socialism's coming on it. Just the pure cringe.
What happened was that eventually Coca-Cola basically spoke up and said this is a copyright infringement.
What it should have done was, since it's even from the Prol Star, it should have just been, instead of the red background, should have just been the communist flag.
Yeah, it should have been, shouldn't it? All I want for Christmas with my Corbyn Christmas wishes is a £10 real living wage for everyone aged 16 plus, 500,000 social houses, 320,000 green new jobs, and an abolition of university tuition fees. Oh, and free TV licenses for the over 75s. It's just...
So effectively a set of Labour policies.
Yeah.
All they want for Christmas.
Is a set of Labour policies. And it's just the cringiest thing I've seen all day. But yes.
So maybe I will do a parody of that, doing the usual, the holidays are coming song, but just change it to communism's coming.
Yeah, I like the idea of that. It's fantastic.
I've got some content for the week.
It was trending along.
Then you'll try and count the minutes of how long you can keep it up before they try and take it down.
I often have to count the minutes, how long I can keep things up.
People are saying make Corbyn homeless for Christmas in the chat. State-owned Christmas wishes. This is trending alongside Tory cuts kill and that sort of thing. So it's just like, oh god, classy Twitter as always. But thank you ever so much, everyone, for watching. I think we'll bring it to a close there. Unfortunately, a bit like towards the end. I mean, I wish I'd just summarised the manifestos previously. Unfortunately, didn't have time, so we could go through the key points and perhaps have some more fun discussion about it. So a little bit drier towards the end here, but I hope that you all enjoyed the stream. A short reminder that it is possible now to join the channel, where you get a nice shiny chat badge and some extra perks that are listed there. You can find the join button next to the subscribe button on the channel, if you can still see that. And until next time, thank you very much for joining us, and have a wonderful week. Just double check that I haven't missed any super chats that have come in. There were a couple more. Autocharth donated $5, says a 20-year-old Britisher failed to prevent cheese in a can from being invented.
Yes, I always I often criticize myself for that. It's given me many a sleepless night.
The new IKB 4472 donated £2 and says, "Make it financially viable to work as an NHS nurse!" Exclamation point. Yes, that is something which would be useful to do, given that nurses are currently, much like our armed forces, experiencing massive real term pay cuts. I think it's something now ridiculous, like 8.5% over the last decade. The new IKB donated £5 says the tracks are sort of nationalised, but no one wants Network Rail's debt on the government books. It would make our national debt noticeably bigger. Thoughts on that, Britisher?
It could well be that it's an accounting trick. I don't know. These tend to be sort of international bodies that look at these things regarding the viability of some of the debts. I mean, one of the reasons that one did the PFI initiatives was because one believed that that was a way of keeping debt off one's books. But I think all that happened was the manner in which national debt was eventually viewed was changed.
Oh,
so
of course it was.
If anything, that was a short-term gain, if you know what I mean, with a great big long-term downside to it.
And finally, the Harry channel has donated $5. Thank you ever so much. You thought I'd forgotten you here, but I haven't. And says, just think how much better British's internet service will be once it's nationalised.
Oh, of course. Yes. Yep. Indeed. Yes. And what I have sort of warned of is the fact that the moment that they have the nationalised company, they wouldn't then be making it a matter of government policy to censor things. It would then be a matter of corporate policy of the nationalised company to decide on what content they would not have on their
service. All in favour of combating extremism, like your week that was, Mr. Britisher, which is clearly radicalising people across the nation.
Well, so I'm told.
And with that, I believe it is time to end. Again, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Apologies that I forgot the super chats at the end there, but we did get through them in the end. And thank you to everyone who donated. So until next week, it's been a pleasure. Thank you to my guests. Thank you, Britisher.
Pleasure to be here.
And thank you very much, Tailed. Whatever your Bulgarian speech was, nobody understood it, nobody cared, and please stop making fun of the Bulgarians. Take care, everybody, and good night.
Toodle pip.